Welcome to Women's Wealth, the podcast with me, Joanne. My mission is to educate, inspire, and empower you all to step into your own life of wealth. That feeling of being so rich in your mind, body, and soul. I'm so happy to have you here. Let's get straight into it. Welcome back to another episode. My name is Joanne and I am your host of Women's Wealth, the podcast. Welcome back if you are returning, and if you're new here, welcome. And I have a guest today, and I've just been saying to my guests, it's been a while since I've dipped my podcast toes into the world of spirituality. I think I've been very educational for the past few episodes. So I'm really looking forward to chatting to my guest today. And I know that she's going to share so much just to make you feel, and I know a lot of women who listen to this are on their own spiritual journey, whether you're at the beginning or in the middle. I know we're going to have some real light bulb moments today, some magical moments. So without further ado, let me introduce my guest to you. I have Reverend Rose Hope with me today, all the way in Canada. Welcome.
Hooray, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be with you all.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. And let's just dive straight in. So one fun fact about you, let's go there first, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty. I know that's right on the spot as well. We didn't plan this.
Fun fact. Okay, well, I don't know how fun this fact is, but my family jokes about me having 9 lives like a cat because I seem to have a lot of brushes with death, or a lot of situations that get me into, I'll say, trouble. And I'll give you a couple examples. I've been stranded in the Mexican desert. I have been on a plane that the engine exploded mid-flight due to an airstrike. I have survived numerous close calls. So I think that's a fun fact for me. It might not be for other people, but boy, oh boy, do they make for great stories, Joanne.
Yeah, I read that when I was your notes. And so when you've had these near-death experiences.
Yeah, well, even outside of those brushes with death, I've also had 2 near deaths where I've actually clinically gone completely unresponsive, heartbeat stopped.
Wow, so you are actually a cat. You have 9 lives. And is it from these experiences and being clinically announced as dead? Is this where I'm going to call them powers, because they are, when we're spiritual, we have these powers. Intuition is a power. Is this where you found that you had your gifts, your powers, or did you know before?
That's a great question. I would say that those gifts came to light a lot more. Like those experiences opened up some doors that had been closed. My first near death, I was only 5 years old. So it's hard to really know how intuitive I was prior to that time. Mom always said that I had this sixth sense to me. But when I had that first near death, after that happened, I really started to notice my dreams became very lucid. I started to become precognitive. So they really unlocked some doors. Would you like me to go into that near death?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I just think they're so powerful. And every time I speak them, it's always so surprising to me how many people come up to me and they say, oh my God, something similar happened to me, but I've never told anybody. So I find such power in being able to share these stories with others so that they know that they're not alone out there. So my first near death, I was 5 years old and I was eating one of those round jawbreaker candies, like a round hard candy. And my dad said, go sit down before you choke. And I turned to go sit down, and sure enough, took a breath in, and that candy got lodged in my throat. So my dad came running over, wrapped his arms around my waist, started doing like abdominal thrust, the Heimlich maneuver, couldn't get it out. And so I went limp in his arms. And so I had an out of body experience at that time. I remember vividly floating above my body and my dad. I remember watching my mom run for the phone. I remember my sister peeking around the corner. And I didn't feel any of the chaos. I felt completely totally held in the arms of God or divine or whatever you call the creator. I was so held and so loved in that moment. Nothing mattered. And I just remember observing, like totally at peace with everything. Now, my dad ended up doing what you should never do. He used his thumb and he pushed against the inside of my throat enough to leverage and get that jawbreaker out. And then he got me breathing again. And so, I often say my dad gave me life not once, but twice. And he sure did that day. And I'm so grateful that he did actually what you're not supposed to do. And he got that jawbreaker candy out. So after that happened, all my blood vessels in my face were broken. So black and blue face. I remember when I was little, like when he was doing the Heimlich, thinking my head was going to pop off. There was so much force and pressure. But, after those physical symptoms subsided, Joanne, I started to notice my dreams become so lucid where I would like be awake in my dreams. And some of the dreams were not so good. I had very, very scary dreams, actually. And I would start to know things before they happened. I remember waking up one morning, going to my mom and saying, "Hey, mom, so-and-so's mom died last night in my dream." And my mom's jaw hit the floor because she had just found out that so-and-so's mom had indeed died. So these sorts of things started to happen, but I was raised in a very loving Catholic home. And what happened then is that I ended up hiding those gifts because I I didn't feel comfortable. My mom, I don't think really knew what to do with me. And so I didn't feel safe and comfortable to be able to, share some of the things I was sharing. And thankfully, my mom just would advise me to pray, and she taught me how to pray when I was younger. So that was a big piece for me. Like when I would have those bad dreams, I would pray and that would help. And so, but for the most part, I hid and stuffed that away. And, we often do that, right? We often are told like, okay, it's not safe for you to be seen and heard as you are. So you better, better hold back, right? Or we are embarrassed by something that we've shared or said, and then we hide it. And so I hid it. I hid it. I hid it. I hid it. I stuffed it all away. And now fast forward to my career, and I've decided to become an EMT firefighter because I want to save lives like my dad saved mine. So that was such inspiration for me. However, when I got into that profession, I had to deal with a lot of death.
Yeah.
And so death became something that was really in my face. And mind you, through my high school years, I had lost a lot of my family and my friends to death. I had a period of like 2 years where like 10 people had died. And so death and I had this very interesting kind of relationship. And so I also understood that death didn't have to be a scary thing, that it could be a beautiful thing because of my own near death when I was 5. I just innately knew that inside of my mind, inside of my heart. And so I started, having these dead bodies that I would have to deal with from time to time, and their spirits would come home with me. And I remember thinking, I'm losing my freaking mind. That's it. I can't stay in this profession. I've got PTSD for sure, And so as these spirits would come home with me, I would just have multiple showers. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I just remember feeling creeped out and just having to like have an extra shower or whatever, just to kind of get that feeling shooken off. And so I didn't stay in that profession more than 5 years because I just thought, okay, this is like too much for me. Either I've lost my mind or something weird's going on. I didn't understand it. So thankfully, that led me into a beautiful teaching career. I ended up teaching in the medical field for a number of years. And then I had a second near death. And so my second near death happened when I was 26 years old. I was recovering from surgery that I had on my knee. I had reconstructive surgery on my knee from an old skiing injury. And I was recovering at home. I had already gone through the surgery. Everything had gone well. But I was hobbling on my crutches from the kitchen to the bed I had made in the living area. And as I was moving, something happened. I all of a sudden started to see black, and I knew I was going. And so thankfully, my brother-in-law was with me and had caught me. But let me tell you where I went that day. So when I went unresponsive, Joanne, I went to the most incredible, beautiful space, and I can only describe it as heaven. I was again held in the arms of God in whatever that looks like to you. I felt like I had found heaven. And what happened for me in that experience is I was floating. I didn't have an out of body. I couldn't see myself below. I had now been transported to some other space, another time, if you will. And around me, surrounding me in all directions, were these beautiful giant orbs of light. And they were so incredibly brilliant in their color. I can't even describe it to you, because even the brightest of colors that we see here, this was beyond that. Okay. And the love that I felt, the unconditional love, like this had really kicked it up a notch from the time I was 5. And maybe I just didn't remember it from when I was 5. But now I was in this like complete euphoria. I felt every cell in my body felt alive for the first time ever. It was unbelievable for me. I remember consciously saying in my mind, I'm staying here. Like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm staying. Like, this is it. I'm with you. And those angels, those energies, those orbs of light spoke to me, not in words, but somehow I heard in my mind very clearly, it's not your time yet. You have work to do. You're not staying here. You can't stay. And as soon as that thought came in, I woke up staring at my brother-in-law as he looked at me wide-eyed. And I didn't know how to articulate to him what had just happened to me. I didn't understand what had just happened to me. And I also was like, oh, if I tell him, he's for sure going to think I'm crazy. Like they're going to send me to the loony bin, right? And so in the days following, that energy, that experience was just so intense and so present for me. I was like, I have to talk about this. Like I cannot not, right? Like I have to share this experience. So a few days later, I'm still in recovery, and a girlfriend comes over for a visit. And I've got to tell her because this is just too profound to not tell. And so I'm explaining this incredible story and the angels and what I felt and the experience. And she's like, oh my God, this is incredible. Meanwhile, my brother-in-law, who was with me the days before and had caught me the days before, he was eavesdropping on our conversation. And I'm so glad that he was, because he came running into the kitchen. He slammed his hand on the counter and he said, I knew it. I felt the angels too, he said. Can you believe that? I get goosebumps every time I say that, because it was such validation of my experience for me. So when I went down, he started to panic because he couldn't find my pulse. It didn't look like I was breathing. Like he was like, I got to call 911. Like she's going to die in my arms. Like he was panicking. So he was going to call 911. And he said what he felt was this whoosh of energy. And all of a sudden, these energies were around him, and he heard them clearly say, she's going to be fine, just wait. And so he paused for a minute, came back to me, and he said, within a few seconds, I opened my eyes with a smile on my face. So that was his experience. And by the way, this happens with near-death experiences. Bystanders who are around when the near-death happens, sometimes the bystanders also experience something spiritual.
They pick up on it.
Yes.
Is he normally not, this would be woo-woo to him. Not like he, whatever, that type of thing.
My brother-in-law and I are very close. Like we've always had this very soulful connection. Like we are family in such a way. And so he's always been a little bit tuned in, but like not to the extent that, I would say I am now, but like he picks up on things like that. So he is empathic. He is somewhat intuitive. So it, in some ways it doesn't surprise me, but it was such a gift for me, Joanne, because that energy of being able to express my story was such a powerful piece. I now was like, okay, I can speak about this. Like, I have this validation. Because you have to remember, I came also from a very scientific background. I was in medicine, I was in health sciences, that was my jam, right? So for a decade, I was so committed to evidence-based experience and what have you. And so I hadn't, again, shoving all my intuitive gifts down, right? I'd kind of gone to the other side, so to speak. And so, yeah, it was just so beautiful. I was like, okay, that's the evidence that I needed in order for me to start sharing this. So a lot of people will say, oh, okay, after those 2 near deaths, then you figured life out. But no, I did not. So I got to share this last bit here because I think that, we have these expectations that we have these experiences or these catalysts or we hit rock bottom or whatever that is for us. And then we're like, oh yeah, now I'm on the path. But after that experience, I really craved heaven. I wanted to go back to that place. I wanted that experience. I wanted that euphoria. And so I searched everywhere outside of myself to find it. I thought, okay, maybe I'll be happy when I find the love of my life, when I have my family, when I have my children, when I reach this certain level of success in my career. I played the I'll be happy when game. Do you know that game? I'll be happy when. It's a losing game, by the way, everybody. And so I was seeking heaven everywhere outside of myself. And the harder I tried, the deeper I sank. So for about 5 years after that second near death, wanting to go back to that space, I really struggled. I was an overachiever, people pleaser on top of it. So here I was trying so hard, working so hard, doing all the right, quote unquote, things, right? And feeling actually more miserable than ever. In fact, I felt so guilty and shameful that I had the life I did, but I was still miserable, right? I'm like, how am I still unhappy? I have everything that everyone could possibly want, and I'm still unhappy. There's something wrong with me. So this story that there was something wrong with me kept playing over and over. So 6 months after I had my son, I didn't know it at the time, but I was experiencing some really deep postpartum depression. On top of this, I can't find heaven. I just want to go back to that heavenly place. And I really did want to go back. I wanted to go back so badly. And I was in so much like emotional and physical pain as well. By this time, I'd been diagnosed with fibromyalgia and all of these things. I felt like a 90-year-old in a 30-year-old's body kind of thing. And I just thought, this is not it. Like, I don't want to be here. I don't think I'm good here for anybody. And I had decided that I was going to take my own life. So this was such a painful time for me, and but yet such a powerful time for me because I got on my hands and knees one night in a place of despair. Like, I was planning out what I was going to do and what was going to be the easiest on my family at that point. And in such a place of despair, I got on my knees and I prayed, as my mom had taught me when I was younger. And I said, okay, God, this is the only path I can see right now. And unless you show me another path, this is what I'm doing. So you need to show me another path, that if I'm not supposed to take this one. And that's exactly what happened. I was visited, as what I could only describe as an angel. And this energy came in that moment of prayer, and it showed me this vision of what I was to do. And this vision was to create a holistic healthcare system. And so I got up the next morning with this new revitalized mission and purpose. And I went for it. I went all in. I started this company. My husband at the time said, this is brilliant, like, go for it. I stepped fully in to building this business. And that business, excuse me, that business is what led me down this spiritual path, because as I grew this holistic business, I started meeting practitioners who could do the Akashic records, and they could do all this spiritual stuff and this intuitive stuff. And I started to become curious. And I thought, oh, wait a second. Like, I used to do some of this stuff when I was younger. I stuffed this away. I started to remember who I was. And so I started now to be curious. And this led me down this path of awe and wonder. And that's one of my biggest tips that I give people is like, they're like, what do? I don't know. I say activate your awe and wonder. Activate that awe and wonder like you've never seen it before, like you're seeing something for the first time again, and you'll see it with a whole new lens. And so I went in with this sense of awe and wonder. And when I first took the Akashic Records, I went in as a skeptic. I went into that course being like, there's no way you can read people like this. There's no way you can pull this information. Like, come on, I'm all science, right? At this point too. And I was like, this is hocus pocus. This is woo-woo stuff. And I stepped in and oh my goodness, the magic that I witnessed that was coming out of me. I was like blown away. Joanne, things that I shouldn't know, I knew. And so that's what really opened the floodgates. And by the way, for the listeners, if you've never heard of the Akashic Records, I just want to give you guys some understanding of what that is. It is your soul's library. It's a beautiful space of consciousness that we can tune into, where everything that we do there is amplified. Our intuition's amplified, our healing is amplified. It's a really beautiful space. I like to call it a soul massage. When you get to the records, it's like having a massage for your soul. And so this is a modality that I've now been doing for well over a decade. And I fell madly in love with it because it opened the floodgates for me. It allowed me to remember who I was. And that was such a gift. And so since then, I have been doing more of that discovery work. I, took my degree in metaphysics, which is my reverendship is in metaphysics. So it is all spirituality, all about the connection with ourselves and our higher selves, and working towards my PhD now in metaphysics. So, this has led me down this path, and I know that I'm meant to be here. My mission really is to create heaven on earth, to help us to understand what that is and how to go about doing that. And so that brings us right to the here and now.
Right now, that's such an amazing story. And I really do, I resonate. I haven't had any experiences like that, but for me, particularly and I think this is for a lot of people actually, and just the way that the world works now, we're fed the science. And I feel like there's probably a bit of a conspiracy, but I think that if people just follow the science, then the people are doing what the people above want them to do. And I think if you do have a call, whatever you want to call it, your intuition, and you're being drawn away from that, I think that's when we really need to start to listen, because I feel like that's where the power is. That's why we're not fed this. This is why we're not taught how to connect to your higher self in school, how to use your intuition. And like through your story, and especially as women, we keep this stuff quiet. We don't, you might tell your best friend if something weird happens or coincidence, and we're not taught about synchronicities and how to really tune into those and listen to those. It's more, if it hasn't got a pie chart, or I can't, not exactly this, but if there's no chart, if there's no data, then sorry, off you go. Don't listen to that, because there's nothing there in black and white. And I really do think a few of the things that you said there was so many ping, 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 just allowing yourself to step into a version of yourself where you are connecting with who you came here to be. Because I'm sure if a lot of us reflect on, and myself included, I've done the thing, college, university. I was a school teacher for 10 years. I left school teaching to do this, but only because I allowed myself to sit and think, okay, so all these things keep happening. I'm going to go down this path. Goodbye, science. Let's see what happens. And I just trust and ask the questions, and, what do I need to do? And just answers come to you. And there's no other way to explain it, that you just need to listen. It is magic. It's there.
It is magic, Joanne. I'm so glad you're speaking to this, because I think this is a story for many of us. We are so conditioned to believe that success looks like X, Y, and Z, right? Like, hey, you go to school, you have a family, you do these things, and then you'll be happy. But we have forgotten to tune into our inner truth, right? We live very outside of ourselves for the most part, and we miss out on these beautiful clues and cues that spirit is giving us. You know, spirit's actually talking to us all the time. It's just that we have been so conditioned to be distracted and be busy, right? You know, this go, go, go kind of energy. And I was the worst for it. I mean, I was that overachiever. I really believed, you know, after my first near death when I was 5, I needed to prove to God that God had made the right choice in letting me stay. So I thought that meant doing. I thought that meant achieving. I thought that meant that I had to prove my worth here. And so that got me really lost in this place of the rat race, of the hamster wheel, whatever you want to call it. And I felt so disconnected from who I was. And I was playing this game, you know, and feeling miserable. Like I said, the I'll be happy when game, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, one of the biggest things that I've learned is to create stillness in my life. And I think this is one of the most powerful and most simplest things that we can do is to create moments of stillness. It doesn't need to be throughout the day, like where I need to meditate for an hour. Because for me, I was feeling guilty. Here I was this spiritual teacher now, and I wasn't having this like hour-long meditative practice like even some of my students were having in the day because I was a single parent. I have 2 kids. You know, there's all these other things that were going on in my life. And I was like feeling so guilty about this. And Spirit was like, Dan, just weave spirituality in. And I want to bring that to the surface, folks, because there is a weaving that can be done where it's not like, oh, I'm spiritual because I do an hour meditation in the morning, an hour at night, and I do yoga and I do all these things. It's like, how do we just allow our day to become more spiritual in of itself?
Yeah. It's the
So,
life. It's not an add-on. And I feel like, sorry,
yes.
up there, but I feel like a lot of spirituality now, and I call it Instagram spirituality,
Yeah.
because it is, you know, and people do it in their own way. But then I feel like a lot of women, you know, we see that and think, oh my God, I need to be doing all the things that you've just said, but this is a separate part of me. So I get up, I meditate, I write in my journal, and then I feel like, well, then that takes away, and this is from my own experience as well, takes away the spirituality of it, because it then becomes another thing that I've got to do in my busy life instead
Yes.
of it becoming my lifestyle. And it weaves, it needs to, you either are spiritual or you know, it's an app, an add-on. I don't, you exactly what you just said. It needs to weave, it needs to be holistic, it needs to fit in with your human life nicely, so it's not an extra thing that you're meant to be doing. Because as well, it's not one size fits all, like you just said. If you're a mom, I'm not, but I have 3 dogs, and even if I tried to sit alone in a room for an hour to meditate, they wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me. They would be scratching at the door. It would not happen.
Right?
So we have to fit that in. So how do you weave? How are you weaving it in?
Well, it's really about like taking a bit more time with yourself. So in the morning, my practice is I wake up with God or divine, whatever you call God. I also love Gus, which is God, universe, source. So Gus, you know, wake up with Gus, wake up with God, wake up with Creator, whatever that is for you. And so what I mean by that is like, I'm not just waking up and be like, oh, Rose, you're waking up, getting out of bed. I say, good morning, God. I know you're waking up with me. Welcome to the day. I also know that you're going to carry me through the day today, and you're going to do all the work for me. Because here's the thing, divine is actually our doer. And I know that like for me, when I first learned that, I was like, well, no, I'm the one that's like doing the speaking. I'm the one that's doing the lifting of the boxes. You know, I'm the one doing that. And I very quickly was reinformed that, you know, in fact, it's that energy all comes from source. It all comes from divine. And so what that did for me is allowed me to get rid of that burden on my back, that weight of the world, because I really felt like, oh my God, if my mission is to create heaven on earth, oh, that's a big project. And like all that in itself can feel really heavy, right? Like, geez, that's a big mission, but it's not me doing it. I'm not responsible. I mean, I am responsible, but I allow God to do the work through me. And so God is speaking here for me. God is the one that is moving through me to have this experience. And so in getting out of my own way in the morning, it just creates such relief for me. It reinforces trust that divine really does have me taken care of because I'm actually validating it. I'm affirming it in the morning. And boy, oh boy, does it make life so much easier, especially on those days when I'm really tired and I
Yeah.
really don't want to get out of bed. I'm like, okay, God, I know you're going to carry me through the day. I know you're going to do all the work and you're going to create all the magic today. Thank you so much. So I acknowledge that and I have that little 2-second conversation. That's all I need, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I start my day. The other part of this is allowing ourselves to be more present through the day. And so even though in some moments we might get caught up in whatever we're doing, like what if I just take my cup of warm lemon water and I just like take a minute to have a smell of that lemon, and then I take a minute to just have a sip. And I just allow that to move through me. And so even just taking a few extra seconds to just tune in, what am I tasting? What am I smelling? What am I seeing as I look around? Even if it's just brief for a couple seconds, that's all you need. The other piece of it, of course, is going back to our breath. Like, can we just take a breath for a minute? Breathe that in, just take a minute and take a breath. And right away, you can feel the body just saying, oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Before I eat, there's a reason we bless our food, because that energy is going into the food and then getting received into the body. Taking a moment to either bless the food or just even ask the body if it wants the food. The
Yeah.
body will talk to you. Okay, the body will tell you. And so just starting to lean in a little bit more to be just a smidge more connected to the
Yeah.
body, to the spirit. Now, one of the big things that I incorporate into my weaving practice of spirituality is actually building relationship with the aspects of my beingness. And what I mean by this is that in metaphysics, we have the true self, which is considered the higher mind or the God mind. So everyone has an aspect of divine within them, right? We came from source, so we have source within us. We call this the God mind or the higher self. Okay. That's the true self. Then we've got the false self, which is known as the ego mind, ego mind. And that ego mind, back thousands of years ago, it was meant to keep us safe. It was its only role was like if we were out and there was predators, that ego mind would go ding, 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 run, go and hide, whatever. Okay. That ego serves a valuable purpose. However, over thousands of years, Joanne, that ego mind has totally hijacked us. So now the ego comes into every thought almost that we have. The ego will interject and say, oh, you're going to make a podcast. Who's going to listen to your podcast? The ego is going to go and say, oh, you can't do that. What will people think? That ego was chattering for me when I had my second near death. And I was like, oh my God, this is so compelling. I want to talk about this. But the ego came in and said, oh, people were going to think you're crazy. So the ego doesn't know its place anymore and it's running the show. But we are supposed to be telling the ego what to do, by the way, everyone. Our job is to control the ego, to tell it what to do, not the other way around. And so one of the most powerful things we can start to do in our day-to-day practice is starting to get that ego to step aside, starting to create boundaries with the ego. And a lot of people say, well, I don't know, is it coming from ego? Is it coming from intuition? I don't know where it's coming from. If you start to build a relationship with these aspects of yourself, then you will be able to discern or differentiate what is what. Okay. And so here's what I invite you to do. This is such a fun way to start building these relationships. So the first thing is that when my ego comes in and chatters, it's usually negative, by the way, right? Okay, that's one clue that it's your ego, is that it's usually a negative thought, like it's a bad thought, right? So the one invitation is for you to actually talk to the ego and to say, hey, thanks. I know you're looking out for me, but I've got this. So even just that little thanks, but I've got this can actually start, the ego starts to go, oh, okay, he or she doesn't really need me to interject there. Okay, they're good. Okay, I'll step aside. So the ego starts to recognize where the boundaries are. It doesn't know the boundaries if you don't set them. It's like a child, okay? And so when that ego pops up, thanks, but I've got this. But if you want to go a step further, give your ego mind a name. Give it a name. So my client the other day, I think this is so hilarious. She called hers Ivana Gripe a lot. Ivana Gripe a lot is what she named her ego, because she's like, my ego's always griping about this and about that. So I think that's so funny. You can call your ego whatever you want. The point being is that if you give it a name, it's easier for you to separate yourself from it. Yes. And so
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's like, mine, her name is Jane. So I'm like, okay, Jane, that's enough of that. Time to step aside. And it's great because my ego comes up far less than it ever has. And I don't get caught on the hamster wheel. You know, the hamster wheel when you're playing a scenario over and over again, either in the past or in the future, right? Or whatever. It's the ego that's doing that. So now I don't get stuck in that anymore. And of
Yeah.
course, giving then your higher self a name, your God self a name would be the next step too, because now you're opening up this beautiful channel where you can receive all this intuitive insight and all this information. So that's a beautiful way to weave in spirituality, where we now become a bit more conscious. We start to have this awareness and we start to put that ego in check a little bit more. And now we can allow divine to lead us. Because when we allow divine to lead us, that's the juicy path. That's the path of opportunity. That's the path of deeper connected experiences. And we will just get so much more in our lives in doing that.
It's easier. I feel like when it's my ego, and again, this has taken me a while to be able to tune in. I see my ego as well, like a grey fog. So if it's
Yes.
like out of it's the old movie. Have you seen Ghost? Patrick Swayze.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
you know the black things that come out of the ground, and it's the like when they're coming to collecting. I think in the movie it's the devil, but that's how
Yeah.
I see my ego, kind of like this black fog that comes out. And I talk to it the same as you just said. I'm like, not today, and I'll see it like coming back into the shadows. But I always go by a feeling as well. So if I'm not sure, you know, the first thoughts, is it my ego or is it intuition? I always find that my ego feels a little bit icky. So if I
Yeah.
question, if it's like
Yes.
a vision of, I'll go and do this. And then if I really question it, like, do you really want to? And then if I'm still like, oh, actually, no, then I'm like, no, that was my ego. And then when it's my intuition, it's a decision that's just like, yeah, let's go. And if I'm like, do you really want to? Yeah. Or like, and I'll ask myself, if someone takes this decision away from you, how are you going to feel? I'm like, oh my, then I'll go. So I kind of, if I'm not sure, if I'm like, right, is this my ego or is this my intuition? Because sometimes the ego dresses up as your intuition because it wants to trick.
Uh-huh. It's
So
yes.
it's that
Yeah.
feeling. It feels
Yeah.
icky. No. And the same if someone asks me to do something and my old people pleaser self would be, you know, the ego. Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm coming. Now I'll just take a breath. It only takes 3 extra seconds to answer the question. Just, do I want to? And then if the answer is yes and it feels a bit ugh, then that's my ego. And if I say no and then it feels nice, I'm going to go with no. And it's allowing yourself to have that time. And again, that's not a huge spiritual practice. That's just okay, but what do you really want?
Yes. Right? What do you really want?
Yeah.
You know, asking ourselves more questions, I think, is a brilliant way to lean in. You know, I also let my ego self look like a little character. Like oftentimes I'll get my clients to imagine like a cartoon character. One of my girlfriends, she imagined hers like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. Like her ego was like Eeyore, like, okay, I guess I'll go, you know, like, you know,
Yeah.
and so it's a really fun way to recognize that we're multidimensional beings and that we do have a lot more power in this than we think. You know, you reminded me as you talked about like setting boundaries, you know, and I use the peace protocol. And so the P and P stands for pause. And so when someone says, hey, you want to go to this party with me on Saturday, I need someone to come with, pause. So buy yourself some time, say, thanks for asking, let me think about it, right? Or just give yourself time, like you said, take a breath, you know, tune in a little bit. But then we ask ourselves, so the E in the peace protocol, it's an acronym. So the P is pause, the E is evaluate. Do I even want to do the thing? Like, do I want to go? Like, do I actually want to go? Or am I saying yes to like please my friend? Or like, do I actually want to go? So evaluate whether or not you want to. The A in the peace protocol is ask, do I have the time, energy, capacity to go? So you might want to go, but you might not have the time, energy, capacity. So asking, do I have the time, energy, capacity to go? The C in the peace protocol is the conditions that need to be met in order for me to say yes. So maybe you want to go, maybe you have the time, energy, capacity, but you want to be able to come home by 9 o'clock. So the conditions are, okay, yeah, I can come, but I need to be home by 9, right? And I even tell people, also add consequences to those conditions not being met, by the way. So if the friend isn't respecting and it's now 9 o'clock and they're like, oh, I just want to stay another hour, what are the consequences to that boundary being broken? Right? Does it mean that you're not going to go with that friend next time, whatever that might be? And then the E in the peace protocol, the final E, is to embrace and celebrate that you've actually taken the time to make sure you're doing what is in alignment for you. So I love peace protocol for me because being a chronic people pleaser, I would get caught up in all these situations where I didn't want to actually be doing the thing. And then I would be resentful that I was doing the thing. And then I'd be mad at myself for doing the thing. You know how it goes.
Yeah. I spent a good few years and I shared a lot about my anxiety on the podcast. And it was the anxiety for me. So I would say yes because I was a people pleaser. And I would still have the anxiety. And then my ego would be like, well, they don't really want you to go. Or if you go, then you're going to have to, and I would put these conditions in. And I was just in a constant cycle of doing things that I did not want to do, which then would give me more anxiety and just living in this state of, it was just a vicious circle until I was like, no. And it was the most empowering thing. And I lost friends along the way, but, gained friends and friends that respect my boundaries and respect that, it's okay to say no. And sometimes I still have the little ego mind and, it's nice when you get a message back when you find your people that are like, oh yeah, no problem, we can reschedule, or I'll come to your house instead, or we'll just go for a coffee. And you're like, oh my gosh, I spent all of those years doing all of these things that I didn't want to. And now how easy it is just to go, no, I'm tired, or, and a lot of the time there's things I say to people as well, staying in and doing nothing is one of the busiest things that you can do. That's one of the things you need to do the most. And back in the days, making up an excuse because all you want to do is stay home and be by yourself, whatever that is to you, whether it's reading, walking, even sitting and watching the TV that we berate ourselves for, and we make up an excuse because we just need that time. And that's the most important time, I think, and learning how to set these boundaries. Again, this is all part of your spiritual practice, connecting with, having that time to connect with yourself.
Absolutely.
Giving yourself permission to do all of these things as well.
I think that creating the space, again, back to us needing some more stillness even. And stillness might mean for us binging on some Netflix for a little bit just to like tune out to the chaos of the world, Stillness might mean meditation. It might mean a walk, by the way. That reflective time is very meditative for us too, right? So, I think we need more of that time. You're absolutely right. And, it's very easy for us to kind of get caught up in all the things that we need to do. And so one of the invitations that I have for people as well is like to look at what can you actually decommit from? What can you look at in your schedule and say, I don't really need to do that. I don't really need to do that. I don't really need to do that. Last week, I wasn't feeling good and I had already recorded several podcast interviews and I was slated to do one in the evening, but I was so exhausted. My voice was starting to go a little bit on me as well. And so I was like, why am I forcing myself to do this thing that I don't really have to do? And so I made the decision to decommit from that. And that to me is actually true integrity. You know, I thought integrity meant that if I committed, that I better stick to that commitment, and I would force myself to go, and then I would end up sick or tired or again resentful or whatever. And what I realized, integrity does not mean that. Integrity means that I'm being so honest with myself that I'm willing to pull the plug if I need to pull the plug, but I'm also willing to be accountable for my decision. So that might
Yeah.
mean, hey, I'm not able to do the thing that I thought I was going to be able to do. Is it going to be okay? You know, how are you going to manage whatever without me? And then let it go.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, oftentimes what I find when I actually decommit, usually the other person's like, oh my God, thank God I didn't want to do the thing either. Like they're so grateful, right? We forget that we're like robbing other people as well of their divine path when we are out of alignment or out of integrity. You know, there's a saying, yesterday's joyful devotion can become today's heavy burden. And what I mean
Yeah.
by that is that maybe yesterday it was easy for me to say yes and it felt right for me to say yes. But now today it's not feeling so good for me to say yes. And if I want to stay in integrity, that means having that conversation, the honest
Yeah.
conversation to say, I know I said yes, but today it's not feeling right for me.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it is, again, it's all about that permission and, excuse me, giving it, patting it off. We're in tune with the coughs.
We are, right?
Giving yourself that permission and again, focusing on I feel like when you focus on yourself and not being that people pleaser, it's self-love, it's self-care. Because again, these things that we're conditioned to answer to other people and feel that we have to answer to other people. And again, putting ourselves and our own feelings and our own energy second. So it's giving yourself that permission to say, actually, it's not selfish to say no, to cancel, to reschedule. And like you said, a lot of the time when I do reschedule or cancel, the other person's like, oh, good, because I've been really busy anyway. And it's so in sync. So if you're feeling that way, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I need to do that with somebody, do it, because they probably want to cancel anyway. But they're having the same conflict because we're so conditioned in this world to meet your targets, meet the deadlines, be on time, do all the things. And it's okay to pull back from that.
It absolutely is. And, you know, when we do that, we give permission for other people to do the same, right? It's like, oh my gosh, there's such relief in that. And did you know, this is really interesting. They did studies on the vibrational frequency of like different energies. Do you know that authenticity actually vibrates at a higher level than love?
Wow.
Authenticity, because authenticity means that I love myself enough to know exactly what I need and I'm going to honor that. So if I'm willing to love myself enough and to honor that, and I'm demonstrating that in the outer world, there's a vibration to that.
Yeah. And that's why we are attracted to people who they're more authentic, people who are living in their authentic selves, if they're vibrating higher. That's why we navigate towards those people, because, you know, it's their energy.
Yeah. So, you know, and I think that piece of integrity and setting those boundaries and being willing to say no, I think that's part of our authentic path of like, is this really in my highest vibration moving forward? You know, and so it gives us this opportunity to be dialing into even more of that authentic self, which I think is so beautiful, you know. You know, at the end of the day, you know, everything that we need is showing up for us, you know, the experiences, the opportunities. And there's such an invitation for us. Again, I mentioned that sense of awe and wonder, you know, to put on those glasses of awe and wonder. You know, I don't know about you, but I've heard the saying over and over again, like, get your head out of the clouds, like you've got to focus. I'm telling you, get your head in the clouds. You know, I'm inviting you to see that there's so much more to this world for you to witness the magic that happens. And we can only do that when we have this beautiful, loving relationship within ourselves. And by the way, knowing that my mission is to create heaven on earth to help people create their own heaven. We all have different versions of what heaven means to us.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that, by the way, is going inside. You know, the biggest lesson that I learned in my whole experience was like, I can't find heaven out here if it doesn't exist within my heart first.
Mm.
I had to develop, what does heaven mean for me? What does heaven look like for me? It means being present. It means allowing myself to savor these moments of opportunity. It is so many things for me. But as you define it for yourself, within yourself, as you walk this inward path along with your soul, you will come to find heaven. And once you find heaven within yourself, once you understand that it is there and it is very present in the moment, here and now, heaven isn't out there. It's not in the future. Heaven is right here. It is in this moment right now that we're exchanging, Joanne, just allowing ourselves to just tune into that frequency. I already can feel it like lighting up my heart. And so what happens when we find it within ourselves is everything outside of us becomes a reflective mirror for us.
Yeah.
And so I even find heaven in the shitty stuff, by the way. You know, the stuff that we might perceive as drama and trauma. Oh, there's some heaven nuggets in there too.
Yeah.
Because our job is to witness. God is in everything. Divine is in everything. Divine is in that not so good experience. Divine is in my desk sitting in front of me. Divine is in everything. So if divine is in everything, that means that there is something good and something beautiful in every opportunity, regardless of our perception. And so that brings to this thought that in every given moment, we have everything we need and then some. And that is the ultimate truth, that in everything, in every experience, we're getting everything that we need if we're willing to receive it, of course. And that's the hard part for us as human beings, because it's like, well, what's the lesson in this person dying? What's the lesson in this breakup? You know, it's hard for us to see when we're in it, but I promise you that there is something so good in every experience. Your job is to then leverage it, to squeeze it for its goodness, and allow yourself to receive the abundance that is here for us. And to me, that's heaven, when we can receive these beautiful wisdom nuggets out of all these experiences, no matter if we perceive it as good or bad, but just allowing ourselves to receive that abundance. And that, to me, is a very heavenly pathway.
Yeah, it is. And I've spoken before, but you put that so nicely though, that finding the lessons in the bad things, but I've never thought it of being, well, I say bad things, it's the things that we don't feel like should be happening.
Right. Yes.
But putting that as being in your own heaven. And you know, I've spoken before, a few years ago my dad was sick and he had cancer. He's in remission now. And at the time, this is when my whole spiritual path started to really take off. And my anxiety that I had before that, it actually went because this situation came up. And now when I reflect back, oh my gosh, and I learned so much from that, and I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for that. And my dad is living his best life now. He's traveling, and you know, but before it happened, he was, you know, just mundane, working, ready to retire, and you know, that kind of traditional retire, then have fun, and you know, and then cross over. But now he's, gosh, puts me to shame.
He's living life fully.
Living his life, night clubbing in Bali until 4 a.m. with, you know, and he's 68, 69, but he's doing it. And at that time, I wouldn't have been like, oh my gosh, in a few years' time, I'm going to look back on this and go, look what I learned and look where I'm at, because I wasn't in that right mind space. But from that situation now, when anything happens, I will shout out as well and say, what are you trying to teach me here? You know, have a little bit of a, like, what's going on here? And then I will sit back and reflect and go, right, I needed to make that mistake because now I know this is the way I want to go. Or, you know, I turn that down to find this. And these things will just happen. You're like, oh, okay, that was shitty. But now now I'm here. So I know exactly what I need to do here. And even this past year, there's been things that I've done, you know, being self-employed now. Sorry, my dog is crying. And, thinking, oh, I need to do this to make money, and I need to do this to make money. And then realizing that, oh no, they're really crappy. But I didn't know they were really crappy until I did it. And the crappy situations actually showed me that this is what you want to do. And I had to do those crappy things to go, oh, okay, I want to be over there. But I needed to go the wrong way to find the right way, and I know that's quite an Instagram quote, but
But it's quite true. The mystics call it continual expectancy, and continual expectancy doesn't mean that we expect a particular outcome, but it's that we expect that whatever it is that does show up for us is exactly what we need for our highest good and the highest good of others. And when we have that perspective, it's like, if the shit's hitting the fan, right? It's like, oh, wait a second. I know there's something in this for me. It's not comfortable, and I'm not happy that I'm going through it, but I know that there's something in it for me. Well, that's when we start to really get the magic. That's when we start to see that redirect. We're so quick to judge with only a few pieces of the puzzle, right? Or to let the ego hijack. I often tell this story about being in my final exam of my last class for a degree. So I also have a health management degree as well that I took in my 20s. And I was on the final exam of this final class. Like, I'm on the home stretch. But because I had failed an exam in a previous class, my ego was telling me the whole time that I'm writing this test, like, you're failing, you don't know the answers. I had convinced myself I knew I had failed. I got to my car, I bawled. I know I've failed this exam. I get home, I write my professor, and I'm like, okay, I know I failed. What do I need to practice for the rewrite? And my professor emails me back and says, I don't know whose test you think you wrote, but you got 87%. This is the power of the ego mind. It will tell us all these stories if we let it. If we let ourselves get hooked in, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. And so our job is to put that aside and see that there's like so much goodness in the experience itself, in lessons and the learnings and the redirecting, like you spoke about. So I think it's so powerful when we can really come to understand that divine creator, God, is your ultimate supplier. And it's supplying you with every ounce of goodness that you need. And even if you perceive it as not so good, know that there's something in there for you too.
Yeah, just trust. So before we wrap up, tell me a little bit about your book.
Oh my gosh, thank you for asking. So this has been this beautiful book, The Arc. So I started writing almost 20 years ago, and I was just writing my story. Didn't really know what it was going to look like. And as I started writing out my story, it was very divinely guided. Most of it was channeled, by the way. Most of it came from divine as I was writing. And at some point, divine said, this isn't your story. This is the story of all of us. And so I actually I took some of my own near-death experiences, but I wrote it from a perspective of a fictional character. So it's written as a fantasy fiction. And so it's about this girl who has these gifts, because we all have them, by the way. Everybody has gifts of intuition. We have this incredible inner technology. And by the way, this is what they don't want you to know, that we have this incredible, incredible inner technology of intuition, of being able to be telepathic. The list goes on. But anyway, point being is she struggles with her gifts as she moves through her upbringing and into adulthood. And then she has a near-death experience that takes her into the realm of the angels. So it's based on my own near-death, but now it takes her into the place where she's actually living in the ark with the angels. That's where they reside. And so she's in this space with the angels, and she stays with the angels, and they teach her all of these lessons and all of these learnings that she is meant to take back with her. So this is the first book of 3, by the way. It is a trilogy. So yes, there's a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of this book, but it's a beautiful book of remembrance. So my hope was that when people would read this, they would remember, they would start to say, oh my gosh, yes, I am an intuitive, or I do remember these things, or I do connect with this, and to evoke that within them, and then to also give them some tangible tools that they could apply to their life. You know, my inspirations were the Celestine Prophecy, and also The Alchemist. So those were a couple of my favorite reads that took you on a beautiful adventure, but taught you some things along the way. And so that's how this book has been written. So thank you for asking about it.
That sounds amazing. And I'll pop, that's available to buy.
It is. It's on Amazon. It is available across the board. So yes, indeed.
I'll pop all of that in the show notes, as with all of your socials and website and everything as well. And
Wonderful.
yeah, thank you so much. I could sit and talk to you all day.
Oh, it was so much fun. I know. I feel like we've just skimmed the surface, but you know, hopefully all of you listening have received some really valuable nuggets. And we're also putting on an event called 7 Days of Creation in January. So I'll make sure that you have that link for the show notes as well. So it's online, it's 7 days, and I go into the Akash for 7 days with you, and it's free. That's just a gift for you. So that if you want to start your 2025 off in a way that really allows you to receive that abundance, allows you to come into higher levels of manifesting, that's a beautiful week to participate in, and it just costs you your time.
Oh yeah, send that over as well. I think I might join that as well then.
Oh, it's so fun. It's so fun. So yeah, would love that. Would love that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And like I said, I'll put everything that you need in the show notes, so you can reach out to myself or, you know, either one of us if you have any questions. And there was something else I was going to say then, but my dog just put me off. So I think that'll be a good note. Good note, because just about to chew the wire. So thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see everybody in